So good day everyone. I am privileged to welcome you all into the third edition of Orangery Literature Festival organized by SDR Knowledge Foundation in association with Raisoni University powered by Raisoni Group of Institutions. I am Himanshi, delighted to be an anchor for today's session. Great Indian Ghost Stories by Mr. Kashif Mashaikh in conversation with Ms. RItu Poddar. Mr. Kashif Mashaikh graduated from the University of Mumbai with a degree in computer science and lives in Mumbai, a study that is often romanticized in his literary work. His debut novel, Mortuary Tales, a modern-day retelling of Vikram Betaal, was published in June 2021 by Westland Books and was well received by critics and readers alike. Mr. Kashif has also assisted renowned author S. Hussain Zaidi with Class of 83. The book is based on the trials and travels of encounter cop Pradeep Sharma and his colleagues from the Mumbai police. Saga of cops and gangsters, the novel was adapted into a Netflix original by Red Chilli Entertainment. It's an honor to have you with us, Mr. Kashif Mashaikh, and this gets even more delightful as we have Mr. RItu Poddar, who will be in conversation with him as the moderator. Ritu is an electrical engineer by qualification, but a writer and a poet. In Asia, she has lived in cities in India, working for IT companies as a technical and content writer. She has been living in Mumbai for 8 years now and intends to stay there forever. Poems have been published in many anthologies, and she dreams of bringing out her own little book of poetry someday soon. I once again welcome you, Kashif sir, and I welcome you. Pratibha. Also, before moving ahead, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the support of Westland Publication as the association is valuable to OCLF. Now, my dear audience, you are about to experience a conversation between two very dynamic individuals. So, without skipping a moment, I humbly invite Ritu ma'am to lead us ahead.
Thank you, Imanshi. Hi, Kashif. It's such a pleasure to talk to you at this platform. Congratulations on Mortuary Tales, your debut novel.
Thank you.
It's really heartening to see the great response it has been receiving from critics and readers alike. So, since the topic of discussion is great horror stories, great Indian horror stories, why don't we start with your book only? I have
Okay.
read the book and enjoyed it thoroughly, but I am sure the readers would like to know it direct from the author.
Sure. Yeah, so Mortuary Tales, with Mortuary Tales, I wanted to create this very mysterious world. So, and some very mysterious characters as well. So, I had these two characters, like Jeevan Ram, and there's this one unnamed apprentice who starts working with him at the mortuary. So, they are sitting at this place, where generally the mood is very banal, or the mood is very gloomy, but they are talking about life. So there was some nice little conflict in that. Okay, and then there's these so this is this frame story about Jeevan Ram and this guy, and they're having these interactions, and this person is very new, very raw. He's just out of college, he's looking for a job, but he's landed up at such a place where generally people don't like to work. So what happens is this guy is very uneasy, and to ease his fears and everything, Jeevan Ram, who's been like he's at the he's in the late 50s, late 60s of his life, so he starts telling him stories about different themes. So that theme could be love, it could be loss, it could be guilt, betrayal, and a lot of these stories are based in Bombay or
Mhm.
Mumbai, to be politically correct. So you know, this city is like another character in the book. So all of it is, like coming together, and all these nine stories are spread out very different from each other. And at the end of this each tale, Jeevan Ram is also giving him a life lesson. Uh, so this thing I kind of drew from Vikram Betal.
Oh,
Because when we were, I think even you will relate to it, like
yeah,
when we were young,
true.
uh,
Watching
it
that.
used to, yeah, it used to come on TV, and at the end of every mysterious story, these two people, they would discuss के उसका analysis वो लोग करते थे कि
Mhm.
हाँ ये क्यों हुआ और वो क्यों हुआ. So I was a bit hesitant whether I should do it right now, but from the general reader response that I've gotten, it really worked, and people were happy seeing that. So that's what Mortuary Tales is all about. There's this one story about the underworld. There's one story about two brothers. There's one story about a woman who's in love with a married man. So there's a lot of difference in
Sorry.
each story. Yeah.
So, any specific reason why you chose the setting to be a mortuary and not a? I mean, it's a very unlikely setting for a book. So,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so again, like it used to happen in Vikram Betaal, that Raja, he used to go to this Shamshan, and he
yes.
used to take that ghost on his back, and he used to go back home. But in modern day, I thought that might be a little too much, so I was trying to find some parallel
Right.
to that place. And mortuary kind of it was fitting the bill because it's like a purgatory, right? So in every like in most religions, there is this one world, one material world over here, and there's this other world which is different, and you have to pass from one world to another. And a purgatory is a place which is a bridge in between.
Right.
But to give it some more, to make it more realistic, I chose a mortuary. So there's this transient place from where you can go from one world into another,
Okay.
and
And
that's
yeah,
how
that
I chose it.
you name your character Jeevan Ram, works in a mortuary. So that is also quite amusing.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
so that's a very nice catch actually. Nobody's caught it earlier.
okay.
But there was this nice little conflict, that there's a person whose name is Jeevan Ram, but he's working at a place where
Yeah.
death rules the roost. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did Mortuary Tales come about? Like, I know you have a day job, so would you like to share your journey about writing that?
Yes. Yeah, so I think I started taking writing seriously around 5-6 years back, and I had worked like on a lot of I had worked on a couple of ideas. I think in 2018 I met Hussein sir. Yeah,
Mhm.
so and then I started assisting him with books at Blue Salt Media. First, I worked with on there's this one book called Behind Bars in Baikalla, which was written by Jigna Vora. So I helped her in structuring and editing the book before it was sent to the publishers. A very interesting book about a female journalist who was accused of being part to a conspiracy to murder a male journalist. J-Day, I think he was a very famous journalist in Bombay. He used to work at Midday, one of Bombay's very famous crime reporters. So that she was an accused in that murder case, and then she got acquitted. So that Behind Bars in Baikalla is her
Yeah.
journey. Very interesting book, and I was like very glad to have got exposure to that book and being able to contribute to that book. Then I assisted Hussain sir with Class of '83 also. Again based in Bombay, about the encounter cops. So it's called Class of '83 because most of the encounter specialists who were very famous at one point of time in Bombay, like Pradeep Sharma, Vijay Salaskar, uh, Aslam Momin, all of these people, they were they graduated from the Class of '83 from the police academy, which is why the book is called Class of '83. So I
Okay.
assisted him with that. And when I got a chance to, work on my own project, I wanted to do an anthology.
Okay.
Because when I'd conceived it, anthologies were really in fashion at that time. So I bounced that idea to Sensor. He kind of liked it, and we kind of bounced it to a couple of publishers, and out of which Westland agreed to publish that book. So something which was conceived in, I think, 2019 January, that came to life in this year,
Yeah.
after the pandemic and all. So yeah, that is how the book came about. It was a long journey, definitely. Even after after all those years, if I discount whatever preparations I had made or how much I had learned, still from putting it down on paper and to publishing it is still like a 1.5 year or a 2 year journey. So lot of hard work. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So coming back to our topic of today, the great Indian horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you, Ramsay brothers, they're called the pioneers of horror cinema in India. What is your take on it? Do you think or do you agree that they are the pioneers of horror cinema in India?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, they have been the pioneers, and the only thing that someone might hold or call them out for, is that their horror was for the masses. And that's not a bad thing at all, because like cinema is like a commercial thing, right? At the end of the day, it has to make money.
Yes.
So they were, kind of pulling out all these movies like Virana, Purana Mandir, Bandarwaza, and they
Yeah.
had all these very similar themes and very low budget. They'd like maybe go off to Mahabaleshwar, shoot for a month,
Yes.
and come back and then just roll the movie out. And that was something which was never, that was something new which was happening. And for the kids of the 80s, at that point of time, you might, find it funny. Like at this point of time, you might find it funny, but if you kind of, if you witness that era, you'll realize how scary it was. Yeah.
Yes, yes. The Z horror show, of course, I remember. I used to be petrified on Friday 9:30 p.m. Z horror show शुरू होने वाला होता था तब.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
definitely. So even cable TV was new in India, and they were doing all these things. So that was a lot of innovation. And
Yeah.
there's suddenly this renewed interest in the Ramses right now, for some reason. Even their office at Lamington Road in Bombay is like, if you go for a road walk, there's this thing called road walks in Bombay,
Hmm.
like they show you all these places and all. So if you go for this Lamington road walk, they'll show you the Ramsey brothers office, and where all these masks and these characters used to be there and all. So yeah, I mean they've done a lot of work, and I think there's uh, it happened by accident actually. They had produced this movie called Ek Nanni Munni Ladki Thi.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes, I know.
and yeah, and the great Prithviraj Kapoor,
Uh-huh.
he came on the screen wearing a ghost mask, and the reaction of the audience was like, they were really petrified, and that was like a eureka moment for the
Oh,
Ramses. Yeah.
oh,
So that gave them the idea that people really want these kind of things, and they started producing these movies.
hmm.
And also, like, one thing that I want to add over here is, like, there's a lot of talk of Ramsey brothers, but there were two daughters in the family too. So the Ramsey sisters are very
Okay.
much missed out when and only the brothers get talked about. So Kamla and Asha ma'am, and Asha ma'am's daughter Alicia is also a horror writer. She published a book recently, Alicia Kirpilani, I think, by HarperCollins. That book is called Ghost in Your Backyards. And it's a very interesting book. I think people should read it if they have interest in the genre.
The Ramsay family is really into ghosts and writing ghost stories and making ghost films.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
So, uh, since you have written a horror fiction novel, so and you have gone through the process of writing horror fiction. So, what do you think are the key differences when it comes to writing horror fiction and non-horror fiction, for that matter, horror and non-horror writing?
Okay. Yeah, so I think at the base of all of this is storytelling, right?
Hmm.
So I think the keyword here is story. The techniques will remain the same. Lot of like how to write good dialogue. I mean, the words may change, but dialogue will be dialogue at its core, right? And the conflict, of course, has to be there. So, like the great Vikram Chandra often says, if there's no conflict, there's no story. In romance, the conflict will be different. Like,
Hmm.
you'll probably have something like the heroine's father is saying no to the hero,
Yeah.
or if they are asking for
Yeah.
dowry,
Yeah.
or or they have some
Love
ill,
triangle or something.
yeah, some love triangle, some illness, or so those will be the conflicts. And when it comes to say horror stories, the conflict will be different. There will be some evil entity who's trying to chase the hero and the heroine out, or something of that kind.
Lover was dead and become a ghost, or
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I think if you understand storytelling, you can write both depending on where your interest lies. But the key is to understand the spine of storytelling and what are the technicalities involved. Uh, More or less, it will remain the same. Only the flavor changes.
Mhm.
Also, I think horror. Uh, what is horror? I mean, horror is somebody's fear coming alive, right? So somebody who values their fame and money,
Hmm.
so losing that can also be a horror story in many ways. Yeah. somebody who's afraid of aging, or somebody who's in love with their beauty or their physical self. Growing old can be like a horror story for them.
Mhm.
So
Right.
you can bring about these traits in a lot of different ways. So the
Yeah.
writing process more or less remains the same. You just have to adjust. Like something is a 2020, something is a test match, something is an ODI. So you can play it in different ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on. Yeah. So, who is your favorite horror writer? Or
My favorite horror writer.
yeah.
Yeah, I think Stephen King, beyond doubt, he is one of the greatest exponents of this art.
Hmm.
He's written so many books: Night Shift, Skeleton Crew, and It. I think this. So I don't think there's anybody who can catch Stephen King when it comes to this genre. He remains my favorite.
Okay. And if I had to ask you about your favorite horror film, maybe in the favorite Indian horror film.
I think let me talk about a non-Indian horror film which I liked
Okay.
a lot. Stephen King's It is like really fascinating, and it can even have an Indian connection. I don't know if you'll remember, Ritu. Like in the 90s, there in the late 90s there was this show called Woe on ZTV, and it was about a shape-shifting clown.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So that show, it used to feel so ahead of its time and so fascinating. I used to watch every episode. And
Mm-hmm.
at that point of time, the internet was not so big in India, right? You had to like go to the cyber cafes to even access the
Yeah.
internet, and there would be this one long wait where you had to like the modem would connect, and even to connect to the internet it would take 20-30 minutes at times. So information was not so freely available at that point of time. But as I started reading, I realized that that show was based on Stephen King's novel called It, and they very conveniently translated it into Woe. Yeah,
Okay.
so like the entire thing about the shape shifting clown is it
Mhm.
was truly terrifying, and it's about like these friends who are all affected by what this entity is doing. So I enjoy these kind of stories when when friends come together and they face some kind of trouble. I enjoy reading them. So yeah, I think that's my favorite horror film.
So, eh, when we compare Indian horror films with a Hollywood horror film, or for that matter, any other foreign film which is based on horror, what do you think is do Indian films lack, or maybe what is the difference, a striking difference that you would say?
Yeah, yeah. So obviously the VFX, like there is way ahead of its time, right? Like compared to what we have over here, the storytelling and the visuals have a lot of edge. Also, I think that the suspension of disbelief. I mean, the reader's readiness or the viewer's readiness to accept that the story which is happening is true is very high when you watch a Hollywood movie. Uh,
Right.
you won't be able to imagine something of that kind happening here in India. Like, something like Inception. It's very difficult to realize, to even imagine that, somebody would accept if Inception was made in India, people would trash that movie like ये क्या बता रहा है सपने में सपना ऐसा थोड़ी होता है. People will say all of those things.
Hmm.
But like when they presented, the presentation is completely believable. It's like cutting edge, right? So people,
घर की मुर्गी दाल बराबर वाली बात है.
yeah.
Maybe.
I think it's also got to do with the way they tell that story and their budgets and the presentation. It's really top notch, right? They can also do something like Spider-Man. People will buy it. They
Hmm.
can construct an entire superhero universe. But in India, that's very difficult to imagine. You need somebody like Hrithik Roshan to pull it off, right?
Yes.
So even say for that matter, imagine The Walking Dead,
Hmm.
right? A very famous AMC series. Uh, Nobody will even have the courage to attempt something like that in India. And I think the only zombie film which worked, I think it's Go Goa Gone, and that was done by Rajan DK, who were the creators of The Family Man.
Yeah.
That has gained cult following in retrospect, actually. So those are like some of the key differences.
Mm,
But
mm,
if the bar is raised, I think eventually in some years maybe even
yes,
you can have that kind of content in India also.
yeah. With new web series like the Radhika Apte is Bhool and a few more coming up, I think the even अच्छी सीरीज बन रही है अब हॉरर की भी इंडिया में भी with all this boom of OTT.
Definitely. Yeah, I think OTT is definitely like given a lot of freedom.
Yeah,
Uh, so it's not like you can still create good content and put it out there for people to consume.
yeah. So that brings me to my next question: that would you like Mortuary Tales to be adapted into a screenplay, and if required, or would you be open to creative changes during the adaptation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for a writer, his work to be adapted into a different medium, that's definitely a plus. So yeah, definitely, and we are in talks with some people to take
Okay.
it forward, but I think it will be
So
too
we
early.
are set for 9 stories or 9 episodes. So we can assume that your next novel is also going to be a horror fiction. So or
Yeah,
are you planning something else?
no. Definitely, I'm going. I'll stick. I'll try to stick to my genre at the most. But there's also this thing that non-fiction works better in India, especially when it comes to books.
Mm-hmm.
Non-fiction is a stronger wicket actually than
Mm-hmm.
fiction. So I don't know. Uh, maybe I'll dabble in non-fiction at some point of time as well. And to come to the second part of your question, whether I'll be open to creative changes, definitely. Like when you write for a book, you are writing with a different mindset. There's some liberties that you can take in a book. Um, I think the greatest liberty that you can take in a book is that you can talk about a character's feelings, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can say what he was feeling inside and all of that. That you can't do in a movie or on screen. You can't do that. So those are two different mediums, and if there are some changes which can improve the quality of the product, I don't think a writer should have any very strong creative opinions that would prevent those kind of things, because they are two different markets.
Yeah. Okay. So we are talking about Indian horror stories, so we cannot not talk about Ram Gopal Verma. So
Mhm.
what is your thought or feeling about his contribution to Indian horror cinema?
Yeah, I think some of the movies that he's made are like very brilliant. I think Raat, I think it's a 1992 movie
Yeah, yeah.
starring Revati. That was like very effective storytelling. The use of characters and locations and camera work was like really top notch in all of that. Uh, Even Revati's performance is
Yes.
to date remembered as one of the best performances.
It is still considered one of the most scary films of uh, Indian film history. Like,
Yeah, and to think of it, it had like no bhoot as such, right?
yeah, yeah.
There was no fanged monster or blood guzzler or something of that kind. So that's very effective
Hmm.
storytelling, brilliant storytelling. Then I think Bhoot, which he made in 2003.
Yes,
Uh, yeah, so even that was a very nice movie in the genre.
hmm.
He's made very effective use of claustrophobic elements. Like there's this lift which is going up and down, and there's this one shot of that lift going through the shaft. So I think it's a very good technique to make the user feel, that he's constrained in
Yes.
in some place. Then there was this movie called Vastu Shastra, which he did
Uh,
about about a family of ghosts which is living in a house. So
Family of
yeah,
Ghosts.
yeah.
Yes,
So I
one
think some
ghost
of
and
his
a family. Yeah.
yeah, I think if you ignore some of the things that have been done by his company, I think these movies in the genre, they are heartbreakers. Yeah, definitely.
So, अब ये movies और stories मतलब written book और stories के बारे में बात करें, sorry, films और books के बारे में. So when it comes to films, the sound and visual elements play a very important role in creating that horror element in the minds of the viewer. So
Mhm.
how do you bring that element when writing a horror story?
Yeah, I
How
think it.
difficult is that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, got to do with the point of view. So every chapter or every even like for the book, there's this one character जिसका point of view चलता है, and if you stick close to his
Hmm.
point of view, so you have to describe what he's seeing,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
wherever the character is, so if he's in a garden, you have to describe what he's seeing. If he's in a mortuary, you have to describe what he's seeing. You can't talk about things like which are very far away from what he's seeing. Or
Yeah.
what he if he's eating something, you have to tell the reader कि जो उसने खाया है उसका टेस्ट क्या है. So that is how you put the reader into the character's shoes, and then they start living the story as the character, and that is how it comes alive, either on the screen or on the page. I think the technique more or less remains the same. You have to stick close to the point of view of your character who's there, who's the focal point of the scene.
So where do you draw your inspirations from? Have you had any ghost-like experience या कोई भी ऐसा भूत देखा है या supernatural experience हुआ है आपको या फिर inspiration कहाँ से आता है सब stories का?
Yeah, so inspiration हर जगह से लेता हूँ. Even like a normal article that I read in the newspaper, I try to give it a twist and say, कि, if I put a horror layer over this, how will it happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can we work something out on that? What was the second part of the question that you asked me?
Have you had any experience ऐसा supernatural या
Yeah, so coming to that, yeah, I mean, कभी कभी होता है, but I tend to brush it off because I want to be a rationalist most of the time. So I remember, like, when I was in ninth or tenth, I used to sleep in my room, and at a particular time in the night, the door of the cupboard used to open up, and it happened two or three times in a row, and it used to happen at a very peculiar time. But like what I used to do is I used to rationalize it, and I used to say कि नहीं ये हवा से हो रहा है, and I just used to close the door and go back to sleep. So
maybe you
uh,
should write a story based on that experience in your next book.
yeah, it could be a short story though
Yeah,
someday.
yeah. So you know what? I come from a small town in Odisha, so I think every village in India has a set of stories and folklore that is very limited to that region. ऐसे दादा लोग सब सुनाते हैं बच्चों को. So
Mhm.
do you think you would ever want to travel to some parts of India, listen to those stories from the old and wise, and base your book or your anthology on those stories? Or do you have any of such stories that you remember from your childhood?
Yeah, so if I find the time, to do all of this, definitely I'd want to do that. From memory, I remember that in my village, we had this well in the compound, and it was a very standalone house located on an isolated stretch of the highway, and we used to go over there during the holidays and live over there. And there was this well, and my cousins were convinced कि वो well में से ना आवाज आती है रात को.
Oh,
Yeah,
अच्छा.
and when you are a child, you tend to believe all of that. Na? So I used to really be scared at that point of time. कि नहीं कुछ तो होगा. And I think even recently there was this film called Tumbad, which was exploring, some
Yes.
of these things underground. So a lot
Yeah.
of people draw their stories from all these folklore and all of that.
Yeah,
And
even my sorry, yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
या तो ऐसा ही एक स्टोरी मुझे अभी याद आ रहा है मेरी दादी कहती थी हम मेहंदी अगर लगाइए और मेहंदी लगे हाथ से घर के बाहर जाओगे तो हर पीपल के पेड़ में भूतनी होती है और वो पकड़ लेती है तो इसलिए उस जिस दिन मेहंदी लगाते थे घर से बाहर ही नहीं जाते थे या फिर और एक कहते थे कि जो हरिकेन्स आते हैं ना तो उड़ीसा में बहुत आते हैं तो वो हरिकेन नहीं होता वो भूत होता है और उसके रास्ते में जो भी आता है उसको खा जाता है वो तो ऐसा
Okay.
सब बचपन में तो हम सुन के डरते ही थे कि अरे हाँ ये ऐसा भूत है उड़िया में खंडिया भूत बोलते थे वो हरिकेन को तो
Okay.
अभी व्हेन यू लुक बैक तो वो हंसी आती है बट वी यूज्ड टू गेट सो स्कैर्ड एट दैट टाइम कि घर से बाहर ही नहीं निकलना है रे या
Yeah. So there was also this beach, nearby where we used to go for these holidays in the village, and there was this very beautiful beach. And when you visited during the day, it used to feel so calming and so nice, you know. But my aunt always used to tell me that you shouldn't sleep on the beach. She had lived all her life there, and her husband also, he was a very good swimmer. Like he
Uh-huh.
could go so far, and dive underwater and all of that. But they used to say that never sleep on the beach. But kids being kids, one time we decided ke chalo beach pe sote hain.
Mm.
And my opinion of the place changed so drastically after that night. Like this thing which used to appear so pleasing and so pleasant during the day, it had a completely different nature at the night,
Mm.
and the sky was all dark, and you couldn't see a thing. I couldn't wait for for the sun to rise for me to go back home, because even like going that stretch in the darkness was feeling like a challenge to me. So वो एक story थी बचपन की, and there was again there was this aunt who was convinced that the sea, it has a character of its own, it has its own personality. So this
Mhm.
beach, it was though it was a very famous beach, it also had this tendency that a lot of people used to go for swims over there and they used to drown.
Okay.
Yeah, so people were convinced that 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 sea has its own personality. So even if you stand far, when you go to the beach, you will stand far and see you will want to get your feet wet, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what they used to say that it just brings the water so far that you want to go a few steps
Oh,
ahead.
okay.
Yeah, and it will draw you closer and closer until it will and it will take you at some point of time. So she used to be very scared of all that. So ये सब चीजें थी, and I think a lot of these have also got to do with safety issues. Like
Mm.
people tell
Yes.
these tales so that kids don't get into trouble. Uh,
Mm.
but of course they can be like interesting subjects. Yeah.
Yes, yes, right, right. So, I'm not sure how much time we have left. Uh, ठीक है, would you like to talk about some of your favorite writers from India?
Yeah, so definitely. Two favorite authors, Vikram Chandra, he's written
Mm.
Red Earth and Pouring Rain, Love and Longing in Bombay, and of course Sacred Games.
Yes.
So, Guruji, Vikram Chandra, and then S.O. Sen Zaidi sir, definitely he writes a lot of programming. He's written 12, 13 books. Each of them are masterpieces in their own right. And a lot of common things between these stories are that most of them are based in Mumbai.
Right.
Yeah, so those are my two favorite writers.
So, okay, Kashif, before we wind up, would you have a piece of advice for the readers who would want to become writers like you one day?
Yeah, so the key thing is not to give up. It's not easy publishing a book, especially in this day and age. Getting traditionally published is not easy. If you want to self-publish and do it on your own, you still can still go ahead and do that. But then you have to do a lot of work on the marketing stuff yourself. The traditional publisher will give you some kind of legitimacy. It will give you marketing power. But again, the choice is yours. You can go either way, whatever works. The key thing is to just keep at it,
Mm.
and hopefully success will be yours. Yeah.
So it was, I think we are done with the session duration. It
Okay.
was so much fun talking to you, Kashif, and congratulations again for your book. All the best with it.
Thank you. Thank
And
you so much.
okay, Himanshi, over to you.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it was a lovely session. I heard so many myths about post and other things. I enjoyed a lot personally. And at the outset, I would like to thank Mr. Kashif and Ms. RItu Poddar for joining us today. We wish we get to hear you both again and be equally enlightened as we all are today. And dear massive audience, I am sure that after witnessing this conversation, you all are taking an enriched version of yourself. Just as I do. Thank you for joining us today. Until I see you again, this is Himanshi Gandhari signing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're done? Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.
vision beyond.